let's fast forward a little bit to the war years. So
Mhm.
you're growing up, you're born in Vienna, eventually you leave Vienna at age 12. The Anschluss happens around age 10. What was that like? What happens? What leads up to it, and what do you remember from it?
My memories are memories of a 10-year-old boy,
Okay.
which is very, very minimal. But Austria had been ruled for a number of years after the First World War. Remember, this First World War only ended in 1918. This was only 15, 20 years later. Well, after the First World War, Austria was pretty much ruled by the Social Democratic Party, socialists. The beginning of 1938, January, February, there was a lot of unrest in Austria and Vienna particularly. We didn't know what the hell it was, but we could feel it. And there was talk about an election coming up, a plebiscite, whatever. Who knows what it was, but it's going to be. And the adults particularly had some inkling of what was forthcoming.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Did you have radio in your home?
A what?
A radio?
Are you kidding?
I'll take that as a no.
That's for the rich people.
Okay. Newspapers? So where do you get your news from?
Where do we get the news?
Your father...
Some neighbors had the radio.
Okay. Would your father read a newspaper? Do you remember your father reading newspapers at all?
I don't.
You don't? Okay.
I don't remember it.
Okay, but the word was out. Something was different. Something had changed.
It was in the air.
You could feel it.
It was in the air. Everyone was talking about plebiscite coming up, and eventually plebiscite, should we join Germany, should we not join Germany, and then I guess the plebiscite was held. There was a foregone conclusion what the plebiscite would bring in,
sure.
Because the people who write the minutes control the meeting, you know. And the vote was to be annexed by Germany, and overnight the world turned topsy-turvy. The chancellor was arrested. All of a sudden we heard new names coming up, Gauleiter or whatever. We don't know what the hell it was. That was the German governor of the province. Was appointed. Never heard of the guy before. All of a sudden the Austrian flag disappeared, and the German flag was all over the place, and some of the goyim now all of a sudden came dressed in khaki uniforms as SA people, including people in our own house, people we were very friendly with, that we never suspected there was anything wrong. There was a house painter who lived on the third or fourth, fifth floor, I don't know which way. And he just painted our apartment a month or two before, with the best of terms. All of a sudden, it turns out to be a high mucky-muck in the SA, and he doesn't know us from Adam. But that happened overnight. And of course, Jewish people were particularly frightened because the anti-Semitism had been latent, now became open. And in those early days, they were still looking over the shoulder. What will America say?
There was actually a hope that America would, be there somehow?
America might interfere. America might say, cut out this nonsense, whatever have you.
America as opposed to England.
America.
Okay.
America didn't say a damn thing.
Right.
But in the early days, the anti-Semitism was occasional beatings, smashing store windows, graffiti on storefronts, don't shop by the Jews, death's heads, and that sort of thing. And then eventually that gave way to roundups of Jews, and women were forced to wear a sign around their necks, I am a Jewish whore, that sort of thing. You
remember seeing that kind of stuff?
Our windows were in the front, facing the street.
Do you remember people walking by your window wearing signs around their necks and things like that?
Oh, sure. I remember people scrubbing the streets with toothbrushes, with Ich bin ein Schweinehund on their neck. I'm a
pig dog.
Pig dog, yeah. And, it kept on escalating. Of course, we had Kristallnacht, and all the shuls were burned.
When was the Anschluss?
March 1938.
1938, okay. So all this that you're talking about now is 1938?
38 and going into 1939.
Okay. I interrupted you. All right, so it's 1939. You're seeing these terrible progression of
people started to be. You couldn't complain to the police because the police were the Nazis. They were standing by and watching looting and everything else. Jewish stores were looted, were taken over, legally taken over.
Mm-hmm.
The government seized the stores.
Mm-hmm. Kristallnacht was in November 1939, I think. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
You remember Kristallnacht?
I remember noise. I remember fears.
Mm-hmm.
Not much. I remember though in 1938, before the Anschluss took place, surreptitiously we heard Hitler talk on the radio in my upstairs neighbor's apartment. Couldn't understand a word of what he said.
Why?
Because the German is different from Austrian German. Austrian German is very gentle, very soft. German is very guttural. And he screamed in his guttural.
You really couldn't understand him?
Couldn't understand what he was saying.
Okay, but it certainly didn't sound very good.
No.
You hear the tone of his voice.
No. It was scary. And of course, he, as soon as the Anschluss took place, he came to Vienna in the great glory and was greeted by thousands and thousands.
During the Viennese.
People waving the flag, and with
the flag being the swastika.
The swastika, of course, and with armbands and all that. And the cardinal came out to greet him and welcome him to Vienna. It was quite a thing.
Do you remember being scared as a child when this was going on?
Not overly. 'Cause I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Well, I gotta tell you,
not overly, but yeah.
If I find that there's an invasion happening to my country, even as a little kid, I would know that that's something scary is going on.
Well, yeah, but you lived through it.
Do you remember how your parents would talk to you when this is going on? Do you remember if they seemed different when it was going on?
Scared out of the wits.
You could tell that they were scared.
Sure.
You could.
Sure. And then, of course, began the roundups of people. And I think I told you that in the summer of 1938, in the early morning, there was a rap on the door. And when we came to the door, a couple of SR people tell my father, you got 5 minutes to pack some stuff and come with us. We don't have much chance to say no thank you. So they packed him some stuff and they took him to the police lockup along with other Jews. So it was a roundup of Jews. And
no, it's funny. Given the memory that your mother must have had as a young woman, knowing that your family, your father and she, had left Poland after the First World War, where your father did not come back, it must have gone through her mind the possibility that your father's not coming back.
Sure. Absolutely. But my mother, you saw my mother as an old woman, and she was a shadow of herself.
Yeah.
But as a young woman, she was very strong and very modern, up to date. She would take us to the doctors for injections and for she would give us our medicines and all. She was very modern. Spoke a little German, not much. She tried to speak a perfect German, it would come out pure Yiddish. Tried to speak pure Yiddish, it would come out German, yeah. But no, she was something special.
So they're taking your father away.
But they took him away, and this was still, as I say, when they were looking over the shoulder, what America will say. They put him in a police lockup, along with dozens of others, and it was still good old days in the sense that we knew where he was, and my mother could bring him a change of clothes and something to eat, because they couldn't eat anything there. It was all trade.
But his crime for which he was rounded up was nothing more than the fact that he's a Jew. He's a Jew.
Sure.
For rounding up the Jews. Today's the day for rounding up the Jews.
Sure.
And this is 1930...
1938.
38, okay.
And eventually, I don't know how long they kept him there, I don't remember anymore. Eventually, I guess they wanted to round up more people and needed a space. So they loaded the people on buses and took him either to Dachau or to Buchenwald, I'm not sure which, concentration camps. Except for my father. My father had been an invalid all his life, since his youth. He'd lost a leg as a boy, supposedly, I don't know for sure, but the story was that he had gone swimming or something and jumped off and probably hurt his leg on a rock or something, and medicine was very advanced in those days, so they couldn't save a leg and they had to amputate it. So he was wearing a
wooden prosthesis.
And so they said with good German understanding that he was not transportable because he was unfit for transportation because of his wooden leg.
See, I've heard this story before, but the piece that I find most shocking about it, at this point in time, are they shooting people in the streets?
No.
That's the only thing that saved him at this point in time in his life. Because the idea that he wasn't transportable when everybody else was being sent to a death camp, they could have shot him and be done with him then.
They didn't have that chachma.
It's a good thing.
And they didn't shoot people in the streets that I know of in those days. Maybe in the 40s, in the
but not yet.
Not at that point.
They ship you out, but they didn't do it. They didn't dirty their hands in their home turf.
No, they do it in the concentration camps. And even the concentration camps, at first I think they more killed them by working them to death and malnutrition and disease.
Right.
Because there's certainly no hygiene in those places.
So they sent him home.
They sent him home. And as far as I know, this was on Tisha B'Av. Now, my recollection may be off. I think my brother disagrees with me. But I think it's on Tisha B'Av. And then some time passed. And it was now fall. And again, the rap on the door. Same thing again. This time they took him to the sports stadium where they played football. Stadium was certainly much larger than police lockup. Where police lockup maybe could lock up a few dozen Jews, the stadium could lock up a few thousand Jews. And again the same thing, they were there, God knows how long. We still knew where he was, but couldn't bring him anything anymore. And what we heard later on is, of course, in the time they were there was a lot of abuse going on. And then, again, they wanted to empty out the place, maybe to round up more people, maybe to play a football game, I don't know what. And again, they sent him home. He was not up to transport. And this time it said, you walk right home, you don't look right, and you don't look left, and you're under house arrest at home. So we took it literally, and he didn't leave the house.
When would that have been, this time he sent home second time?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. So your memory is, at least as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old.
As far as I was concerned, my father's birthdays were the day that he was supposed to have been born in Vienna, in Poland, and Tisha B'Av Yom Kippur. Because those are rebirths.
That's powerful imagery. So he stayed home.
So he stayed home.
So no Parnassa anymore.
Of course not. We had such a big, thriving concern that they appointed an Abwickler, a person to take over the business. Our mail, such as we had, was sent to the Abwickler. We had to get it from him.
And that's a state-controlled thing at this point?
Sure. It's all party patronage.
Right. So the business leaves the house, leaves the apartment anyway, such as it was.
Didn't have any great deal from us because there's no money to take.
Right.
If they made an Abwickler over a big department store, yeah, he got his peckle. For us, there's nothing to take. But it meant my father couldn't work anymore. And so he lived on what little savings he had scraped together, which wasn't much. Occasionally we got $10 in the mail from my aunt in New York, and $10 was a heap of money in those days. You could live a month on $10 or something. Sometimes you got some before the Second World War broke out, which was 1939. We would get some packages from Mishpocha in Poland, some butter, some sausage, whatever. We also in those days the Germans instituted a ration system. They rationed butter, they rationed cheese, they rationed bread, they rationed everything, special meats. We had no use for the ration stamps for meats.
Right.
It was all trade. What saved us also to a large extent was we had a Gorsha super who really risked his life and would slip us a loaf of bread every once in a while. And we'd give him our meat ration stamps, what we were going to do with them. If he had been caught, he would have paid heavily for that. There were you couldn't go shopping. Jews were only allowed to shop between certain hours, maybe an hour or two a day. And of course, some of the shopkeepers that's when they were busiest with the other customer. Not that there was that much to buy, anyhow. Anyhow, we were living in the apartment for 2 years, getting by, scraping by. By this time, my siblings had all been sent away already for safekeeping. First, my sister and Bibi were sent to the U.S. To be with my aunts and my uncle. Bibi didn't last long, unfortunately. Then my brother Leo was sent to England.
This is all happening what year?
38.
Everything's in 38.
38.
So it wasn't very long.
No, you try to get them out as fast as you can. The first thing parents are concerned about are their children.
So when the Anschluss happens in 38.
March 38.
And you're already shipping the kids out in 38. In other words, so they knew this was not going to blow over so quickly.
No. And there were limits to where it could go. The world didn't want us. America didn't want us. So Leah was sent to England in the Kindertransport, and he lived there till after the war, married there, lived in camps, and the English government, Yamach Shemam, interned them as enemy aliens during the Second World War. My brother Hesh was sent to Holland, The Dutch Jews were marvelous. They really took these refugee kids in. But unfortunately didn't last long, because then the Germans invaded Holland and instituted concentration camps in Holland as well. And Hesse went through several Dutch concentration camps and finally ended up in Auschwitz, where fortunately Hesse is a very talented man. Even as a boy, he was very talented with his hands. He could make anything, do anything. And he ended up as being slave labor, working for the Philips company.
Electronics.
What electronics? He didn't have electronics in those days.
That's what he said.
I know what he made. It's all electronics?
Something wiring. Something wiring.
Yeah, it could be. Could be. Transformers.
He lied. He said he knew what to do.
Of course.
And they believed him.
Anything asked him, can you do this? Of course.
Learn on the job.
Of course you can. I would have said no, and I would have ended up in the gas ovens.
But he said yes, and he became slave labor in it
Yeah.
for Philips while in Auschwitz.
While in Auschwitz. And that saved him, and we survived through the war years until...
Not a particularly hardy guy, by the way, but a talented guy. In other words, if he had to rely on his brawn, forget it.
He was frail. He was a little nothing, but very gutsy and very capable to work with his hands.
Amazing. So he was sent away.
Not too long ago, there was something in the papers about a new law in Germany, I guess what it was, forcing the operators, slave laborers, sites to reimburse former slave laborers for the years that they worked for them. And people can make application and so forth.
So theoretically, Phillips could reimburse him.
Yeah. So I said to Hesse, "Are you going to apply for it?" He said, "Absolutely not." I said, "Why not?" And you spent 2 years, you know. He said, "He saved my life. How can I ask him for it?" We heard about Kurt Schindler.
Mm-hmm.
He did the same thing.
Oscar Schindler. Kurt Wallheim.
Yeah. Oscar Schindler. He did the same thing. He took the Jewish kids off the bus that was headed for the killing fields.
Hesse has a tremendous across the tongue for...
So Hesse said, how can I ask him for money?
Can't do it.
The man saved my life.
So so that's also 38? He's sent away to Holland?
Well, 38. It was shortly after his bar mitzvah.
Do you know what year it was that he was rescued from Auschwitz?
When the war ended.
44.
Yeah.
And how long was he in... Do you know what year was the Holland was invaded? Do you have any idea?
Well, Germany declared war on Poland in 1939. And England, of course, had a treaty with Poland, so England came in
to Poland's aid.
With Poland's aid, and then France came, and then Germany started to push into first of all Belgium,
the East,
Holland, which was
they were lightweights.
Almost they had almost no defenses at all, right. And then eventually France. I'm not sure what the which preceded what. Mm-hmm. It was France first. I don't know, but they fell like a bunch of dominoes. And
so certainly for a couple of years, Hesse is bouncing from camp to camp.
For a year maybe, and then he went to Auschwitz. He must have been Auschwitz for 3 or 4 years.
It's extraordinary.
Survived there.
It's extraordinary. He's told me a few stories, not a lot. Yeah. He's told me a few stories.
No, with all the aside from the rishes and the uncertainty that you could be shot in the spot or be sent to the chambers, there was first starvation,
and malnutrition,
and secondly there was
dysentery.
a great deal of dysentery and stuff, and how he survived that, I'll never know.
Recently I sent you a copy of a videotape of his video testimony that he made.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was cut short.
So I've sent you another copy. You, for some odd reason, you only saw 15 minutes of it. It's an hour and a half long.
Yeah.
So you should be receiving it this week, and you'll tell me.
Okay.
It's in Hebrew, so you have to tell me what I missed. It's unfortunately not.
Hesh's recollections are much stronger than mine, but then he was 3 years older than me.
And yet, what I remember Hesh telling me is that despite his hour and a half testimony, how do you fit 4 years into an hour and a half's worth of testimony? He says he was actually very disappointed with the video when he saw it. He felt there was much more that he wanted to say that he didn't get a chance to say, either because he didn't think of it at the time or because he wasn't asked about it. But extraordinary. All right, so it's 38. They're all your siblings are sent away.
That's right.
You're with your
left at
parents.
home with my parents.
Okay.
And we are under house arrest.
For how long? Until you leave?
1940.
And what happens in 1940? And how is it that you find a way to leave? And who? I'm sorry. Before you get there, who makes all these arrangements for your siblings? How does this happen?
Oh, I said my mother and my father worked very hard. All parents did. People would hock their all their resources to send the kids to Shanghai.
Sugihara.
Because Shanghai would let them in.
Mm-hmm.
The Swiss, Yamach Shemom, of course, when Jews tried to cross the border to Switzerland, sent them back.
But they're not just sending you kids away. With the exception of Bibi and Molly, they're sending to family. The other brothers, they're just sending away.
That's right.
They don't know what their fate is at all. They're sending to the Jewish community in those countries.
But they would live.
Right. Right. Well, but essentially, they have an address and train ticket. Is that how they get there, by train?
Oh sure. I'm
trying to put myself in the shoes of a 13, 14, 15-year-old.
What I didn't mention before was there was a strong Zionist atmosphere in the Jewish population, our Jewish population. Because remember, in Vienna there were two kinds of Jews. There were the Jews that had been lived there for 300 years, 400 years, highly assimilated Jews. We didn't have anything to do with those Jews.
Yeah, they went to the camps too.
Yeah, of course. But they weren't our Jews.
Right. We
were the Galician newcomers who would come after the First World War.
So it's like the Polish Jews going to America and meeting the German Jews here.
Sure.
Right. You're right.
Sure. I was going to say something. I forget right away.
No, so it's very Zionistic.
Oh yes. Hesh joined Shomadati, which is now called Bnei Akiva, which was the Orthodox Jewish youth movement. Basically, they would join when they were about 10, so forth, and continue until they were maybe 14, 15.
Indoctrinate them with Zionist ideology.
Absolutely, and then they'd go on Hakshara.
But Dati, religious Zionism.
Yeah. They would go to Hakshara, which was preparation for what they would have to do once they got to Palestine, basically in terms of kibbutz life and things of that sort.
So that was a goal.
That was a goal. And then they would go to Palestine.
This is pre-war.
This was pre-war. My brother Bibi, Oliver Shalom, joined the Shomat Iyar, which was a very secular, maybe strong anti-religious Zionist youth group. Also, same thing. And my father was not too thrilled with that, for obvious reasons. And I'm sure they had plenty of arguments over that. And Bibi did go to Hakshara, up in the Alps someplace, in the Austrian Alps, probably 1937, 36 or 7, and sent us back a photo of him standing there.
In his
uniform? On the Alps with his tefillin down.
Uniform and tefillin.
Uniform tefillin. To show us that he may be with the Shomat Iyar, but he's still Yid,
That's funny.
We still have a picture someplace, I think.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. So your brothers were
When-
intending to make Aliyah,
Oh, yeah.
such as it was. I mean, they
Oh,
called
yeah.
Aliyah then.
He speaks in the short 50-minute thing that I saw, speaks very strongly about how strong the Zionist sentiment was, and everybody wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael and so forth.
Do you remember?
Now, I joined Shomer Dati tagging after him,
after Hesh.
after Hesh, and he was called, he was a big knacker, he was called Flea, so I was Vance.
Cockroach.
Yeah, go to meetings, go to Oneg Shabbat, that sort of thing. Sure.
Do you recall, leaving aside your parents' opinion of your oldest brother with Shomer Hatzair, how did do you remember your family talking about Zionism? I mean, do you remember your father talking about Zionism? I mean, with the idea of Palestine, was that real?
Hesh makes
or was that more of a dream?
Hesh makes mention of it in the piece that I saw, that my father never really had much discussion thing, but he was a very strong pro-Zionist.
Your father?
Yeah, having at one time even voted in the elections for the Zionist Congress. How did he know that he did? Because you had to
register.
You had to pay a shekel or something to be able to vote.
And so they kept
and he
tax.
had a shekel certificate.
That's wonderful.
So he saw that. So my father was not an outgoing. I mean, he didn't come to meetings and rant and rave.
But he wasn't unaware either.
No, and his strong leanings.
Look at that. I didn't know that. So it's 1939, 1940.
Mm-hmm.
You've now been with your parents by yourself for 2 years now, under house arrest, which I can only imagine felt like an eternity. And then what happens?
Then we got affidavits from New York for us to come to America. And you got to remember the times and the problems. The recession was hardly over.
In America.
In America.
No recession, depression.
Depression. My mishpacha were not rich people. My uncle Ani and his brother-in-law operated a little, tiny little pans manufacturing and sales.
Lower East Side, no?
And on the Lower East Side, just a storefront. I mean, it's not that we're doing it for the masses, and I'm sure they didn't make any substantial money from that. My Aunt Lena worked for a department store on 14th Street. My Aunt Dora was at home; it didn't work, so there was no great money there. To send an affidavit, which is an invitation to come to live in the United States, you had to put up bond.
So you wouldn't become a...
You wouldn't become a public dependent on public funds. I don't know what the bond was, $500, $1,000, whatever, per person.
Well, who had that kind of money?
Who had that kind of money? Right after the Depression. And to the extent to which they could schlep together a few dollars, they'd already brought in my brother, my sister, my Aunt Hensha, her husband. They had 3 children.
Where had they been up until then?
In New York.
No. Were they Viennese also?
From Vienna.
They were also Viennese.
From Vienna.
They live in your same neighborhood?
And not far.
You remember visiting with them?
Yeah, I wasn't too thrilled.
Oh, the families weren't terribly close. But you remember them there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. My Uncle Isaac was a big smoker, and I think he wasn't much of a provider. Hensha did more of providing than he did. She went out and sold sundries, door to door, something like that. And he would sit in the coffee houses and smoke and drink.
This is Godsman, no?
That's Godsman.
Godsman, yeah.
Yeah. Fred's father.
Right.
But I may be doing them injustice because I really didn't know them that well. That's just an impression I got. Anyhow, there wasn't any money there and so forth. And my aunt...
So after bringing over all the other
Yeah.
members of the family, they put up for the three of you.
And don't forget that my sister and my brother lived with them in their one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. And they provided for Hench's family and all that, so on. But my Aunt Lena was Meshukala Dover. She was absolutely
Driven woman.
driven. And I guess she knocked on doors we never heard of before, relatives, distant relatives, whatever, and schlepped together the bond and finally sent us affidavits.